Captain America 4 is out. Have you all seen it yet? Not long ago, Captain China, Nezha is back, and this time he's taking over the world. The Chinese animated film Nezha 2 just smashed an incredible record, crossing the $1.2 billion mark at the global box office. That makes it the first film in China's history to break the 100 billion yuan milestone and secures its spot in the top 20 highest grossing films of all time worldwide. And it's still climbing. The success of Nezha 2 is no accident. As a sequel to 2019's breakout hit Nezha, it continues the themes of rebellion and destiny that resonated so strongly with Chinese audiences, this time with even more stunning visuals. The story follows Nezha as he challenges the established order of gods and demons, fighting against fate itself. And that core theme, defying authority, rewriting destiny, has the potential to resonate far beyond China. For decades, Hollywood has dominated the global film industry, especially when it comes to animation. Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks have owned the market, producing the biggest box office hits. But this time, a fully Chinese-produced animated film, deeply rooted in traditional mythology, has broken the billion-dollar barrier, something we've never seen before. In early IMAX screenings in Australia and New Zealand, Nezha 2 even outperformed pre-sales for Captain America 4. In an era where superhero movies dominate, that's a sign worth paying attention to. Compared to Captain America 4, Nezha 2 is simply the superior film in almost every way. While Captain America 4 is yet another installment in a franchise that's struggling to stay fresh, Nezha 2 builds on the massive success of its predecessor with a gripping narrative, stunning visuals, and a protagonist whose struggle feels far more compelling than yet another Marvel superhero passing the baton. The biggest difference lies in the emotional stakes and story depth. Nezha 2 isn't just another hero versus villain story. It's about fate, personal identity, and breaking free from the societal expectations. Nezha's battle isn't just physical, it's deeply psychological and symbolic. In contrast, Captain America 4 follows a formula we've seen countless times before. A new Captain America stepping into the role, facing yet another generic villain, and ultimately reinforcing the same patriotic themes that have driven the franchise for over a decade. Visually, Nezha 2 is breathtaking. The animation is vibrant, dynamic, and packed with artistic creativity that puts many Hollywood CGI-heavy films to shame. Meanwhile, Captain America 4 is likely to rely on the same predictable mix of CGI-heavy fight scenes and uninspired action sequences that have made recent Marvel films feel repetitive. Most importantly, Nezha 2 carries a unique cultural identity while still delivering a universally resonant story. It's not just another entry in an overextended franchise, it's a fresh, emotionally rich film that stands on its own. While Marvel continues to pump out sequels that struggle to match the highs of its past, Nezha 2 proves that great storytelling, deep themes, and breathtaking visuals can still captivate audiences worldwide. So here's the question. How did a Chinese animated film achieve such massive success? Is it just because China has a huge population? If that were the case, why did Disney's The Little Mermaid underperform? And why has Hollywood struggled to produce high-quality films in recent years, relying on formulaic big franchise movies instead? Let's break it all down. When Disney's The Little Mermaid, starring African-American actress Halle Bailey, hit theaters, it flopped in China, pulling in just $3.6 million at the box office. And instead of admitting that the movie just wasn't that good, Americans got mad and accused Chinese audiences of racism. But let's be real, this movie didn't do well anywhere. It wasn't just China. So why was China singled out with this massive accusation? From the moment Disney announced a black actress as Ariel, even many black Americans were questioning the decision. If Hollywood really cared about diversity, why not create new characters for black actors instead of race-swapping existing ones? But instead of doing that, they keep doubling down. It's not just Ariel, Snow White, Cleopatra, Cinderella's fairy godmother. They've all been turned into black characters. Why is Hollywood so obsessed with race-swapping traditionally white characters? Most people would say it's about political correctness. After all, in today's American media landscape, if you don't pander to certain narratives, you risk being labeled racist and boycotted the next day. But if you look back at Hollywood's 100-year history, you'll see that this isn't just about political pressure. On the surface, it might seem like artistic choices are being sacrificed for ideology. But in reality, this is about something else entirely. Hollywood's major studios have lost control to corporate interests that only care about maximizing profit. There's already plenty of discussion online about how The Little Mermaid and other race-swapped movies have gone too far with political messaging. But today, I want to go a step further. Let's break down why the rise of Black Snow Whites isn't just about politics, but actually a calculated move to squeeze every last dollar out of Hollywood's broken business model. Is Hollywood making more Black-led movies out of respect for Black people? Not exactly. There's no denying that civil rights movements have led to greater recognition for Black Americans. But at the end of the day, Hollywood is an industry driven by profit, not activism. If something doesn't make money, you can bet that corporate America won't be investing in it. The rise of Black protagonists in Hollywood films isn't just about representation, it's about business. And there are two major financial reasons behind it. First, for Hollywood studios, box office revenue isn't as important as it used to be. They're willing to sacrifice some ticket sales for a bigger business strategy. Take The Little Mermaid, for example. It had a massive $250 million budget, but only grossed $500 million worldwide. Based on the rule of thumb that a blockbuster needs to make 3 to 4 times its budget to break even, it looks like a financial disaster. But here's the catch. Disney isn't just a movie studio anymore. Look at their financial reports. Movies only make up 20% of their total revenue, while the other 80% comes from merchandise, theme parks, and media networks. Whatever money they lost at the box office, they can easily make back elsewhere. Even though The Little Mermaid was criticized in many parts of the world, it was widely praised in the US, with people calling Disney a progressive, socially responsible company. And that positive PR pays off. Big brands like McDonald's rushed to collaborate with The Little Mermaid on promotional deals. Meanwhile, Black Americans, who are the most TV-engaged demographic in the US, now see Disney as an ally. That kind of brand loyalty means more Disney plus subscriptions, more merchandise sales, and more theme park visits. You might think Disney took a financial hit, but when you look at the bigger picture, they're playing the long game. And it's not just Disney. Other major Hollywood studios like Warner Brothers, Universal, and Paramount are no longer just film companies either. They've evolved into media conglomerates or subsidiaries of massive entertainment corporations. For these corporate giants, movies are just one part of the business. Sure, a box office hit is great, but their real focus is expanding revenue streams outside of theaters. The second reason we're seeing more Black leads in Hollywood movies has to do with America's changing demographics. In the long run, Hollywood isn't just catering to today's audience. It's investing in its future consumers. The reality is, white Americans are shrinking as a percentage of the U.S. population. Over the last decade, the white population has been declining, and today it's at a historic low. Among Americans under 18, minorities already make up more than half. Looking even further ahead, African Americans and Latinos will be the dominant consumer groups. Hollywood knows this, and they're getting a head start on securing their loyalty. That's exactly why, in recent years, so many Hollywood blockbusters have ditched white leads. Take Transformers, Spider-Man, and The Flash. All of them, coincidentally, chose Latino actors as their protagonists. If this were really just about racial equality, why aren't we seeing more Asian leads in these major franchises? Why is it that Asian actors mostly show up in indie films like Everything Everywhere All at Once, or get stuck playing stereotypical side characters in big-budget productions? Simple. There just aren't that many Asians in America. But don't be shocked by how business-driven Hollywood is. If you really understand its history, you'll see that this race-swapping strategy is just business as usual. The truth is, major studios have never put art first. Profit always comes first. Many of the classic films we celebrate today only exist because their creators had to beg, fight, and sometimes even threaten to take their own lives just to get funding. Take James Cameron, for example. After making Titanic, one of the biggest films of all time, he had an ambitious new idea in 2005, a groundbreaking sci-fi epic called Avatar. Now, if this were China, a director of his caliber saying, "I want to make a revolutionary film," would have investors lining up at his house overnight, briefcases full of cash, desperate to fund it. But when Cameron pitched Avatar to 20th Century Fox, media mogul Rupert Murdoch wasn't sold. A bunch of blue aliens, no established IP, and you want me to pour money into this? So Fox refused to greenlight the project. It wasn't until they found two private equity firms willing to split the financial risk that Murdoch finally agreed, but only under strict conditions. The budget was capped at $300 million, and if it went over, Cameron himself had to cover the extra costs. No way Fox was losing money on this. Surprisingly, Cameron took the deal. Why? Because he knew exactly how Hollywood operated. He had already been through this with Titanic, where Fox kept squeezing the budget so tight that Cameron had to threaten to kill himself just to get more funding. Steven Spielberg faced the same nonsense when he was making his 3D Tintin adaptation. Funding was locked in, then Universal suddenly backed out, claiming the project was too risky. Go back even further, and movies like Blade Runner nearly got scrapped because investors didn't want to take a chance on something outside the mainstream. So no, Hollywood studios aren't visionaries or master strategists. If it weren't for stubborn directors fighting tooth and nail, the industry would have been stuck churning out nothing but sequels and spin-offs. Instead of No Way Home bringing together 3 Spider-Men, we'd probably be watching 8 versions of Spider-Man fighting Green Goblin. But Hollywood wasn't always this stingy and conservative. Back in the 1940s and 50s, it actually produced a lot of groundbreaking, artistically daring films. However, one major crisis and an ever-growing obsession with profit completely changed the game. Before the 1950s, Hollywood was at its peak. The average American went to the movies 30 times a year. But then, television took off. Suddenly, people stopped going to theaters, and many studios went bankrupt, including RKO, one of the Big 8 studios of Hollywood's golden age, known for King Kong and Citizen Kane. By the 1960s and 70s, blockbusters like James Bond, Star Wars, and The Terminator helped bring audiences back, allowing Hollywood to survive the TV crisis. But making blockbusters required serious funding. Studios were struggling, so where could they get the money? Universal was the first to figure it out. Find a corporate sugar daddy. In the 60s, Universal merged with media giant MCA. With that financial backing, it produced hits like Jaws and Jurassic Park, and in 1964, it opened the first Universal Studios theme park. What started as a B-movie studio churning out low-budget horror films transformed into one of Hollywood's most profitable powerhouses. Other studios saw this and thought, why are we playing hard to get? Time to find our own big investors. The reality is, every major studio that has survived to this day owes its existence to a corporate giant backing it. But as always, there's a price to pay. Signing a deal with big capital means giving up creative control. In the past, directors had a lot of freedom. Filmmaking was all about dream big, spend big. Take Heaven's Gate, 1980, for example. Its original budget was just $7.5 million, but the director kept expanding his vision during production, and the cost ballooned to $36 million. When the movie bombed at the box office, it nearly bankrupted United Artists, the studio founded by Charlie Chaplin himself. To studio executives who treat every dollar like $100, this was unacceptable. So Heaven's Gate became the perfect excuse for major corporations to tighten their grip. Using the film's failure as leverage, they stripped directors of their final cut privileges. From that point on, studios took full control over budgets, casting, and creative decisions. Many film historians consider Heaven's Gate's failure the death knell of the new Hollywood era, marking the point where art became completely subordinate to business. In the early 90s, Tim Burton directed 2 dark and gothic Batman films that were both box office hits. But McDonald's, one of the movie's biggest promotional partners, wasn't happy. They thought Burton's Batman was too dark and not toy-friendly. Warner Brothers realized that if they made a more family-friendly version, they could sell even more Happy Meal toys. So they did. The result? One of the worst Batman movies in history. Corporate interference didn't just change Hollywood's style, it reshaped the very types of movies being made. In the 1980s, 60% of Hollywood's biggest films were original stories. That was the era that gave us classics like E.T. and Back to the Future. But over the last 40 years, studios became increasingly obsessed with pre-existing IPs and franchises. Today, original films make up less than 20% of major Hollywood releases. Everything else is either a sequel, a remake, or a reboot. Formulaic movies will never have the same emotional impact as Titanic, but they have one big advantage: they're safe. For the past decade, Hollywood has tried making non-franchise blockbusters like Dunkirk and Babylon. Even with great reviews, they weren't massive box office hits. Meanwhile, Disney and Sony brought back three generations of Spider-Man, played the nostalgia card, and raked in $2 billion, despite No Way Home being, at best, a mediocre movie. The success of cinematic universes hasn't just convinced studios to double down on franchises, it's also weakened the role of directors. Look at Marvel. They almost never hire A-list directors, and even when they do, those directors rarely stay for multiple films. That's because Marvel understands that big-name directors are harder to control. If your entire formula is based on predictable storytelling, then it doesn't matter who directs the movie. The director's job isn't to be creative, it's to be obedient. And the rise of streaming and mobile gaming has only made things worse. In the past, studios had to rely on ticket sales. Now all they have to do is keep milking the same IP, ensuring it stays relevant enough to sell toys, license merchandise, and develop video games. A Hollywood executive once admitted, "A movie's value isn't based on how much money it makes, it's about how many business opportunities it creates." Translation? Hollywood doesn't make movies anymore. They make commercials for their own merchandise. That's why a decade ago, we were still getting ambitious, original blockbusters like Pirates of the Caribbean and Avatar. Directors like Christopher Nolan were rising stars. But today, watch a Hollywood trailer and you can already predict the whole plot. That's because taking creative risks isn't profitable and working with eccentric geniuses isn't efficient. So cherish today's Hollywood blockbusters because the movies we're calling generic and uninspired now, in a few years they might actually look pretty damn creative compared to what's coming next. At the same time that Disney is obsessed with making black princesses, it also laid off hundreds of employees at Pixar, a studio once famous for pushing creative boundaries, but now considered too expensive to maintain. Pixar, the brainchild of Steve Jobs, was once a symbol of imagination. But in today's Hollywood, where profit rules everything, idealistic studios like Pixar are simply too costly to keep around. Today, Hollywood is using black representation as a marketing tool. But in the future, it could be anything, because at this point, the only thing that doesn't matter is the art itself. We might just be heading toward a Hollywood that's all business, no masters. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps keep these discussions going.